everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now, today I'm speaking with clinical and performance psychologist Dr. Jonathan Fader. Jonathan, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Dan, it's a pleasure to be on and to make this across the pond connection, because I know of all the good work you're doing over there in the EU, and it's just great to share thoughts about what's happening here in the States and hear all of your thoughts as well.
Absolutely, and I'm super excited to have you on because I saw you present via the power of technology. I was at Cardiff University for a training day, and the whole audience got to see you present via satellite, via Skype, and got to watch some dancing, which was different.
Well, first of all, I'm grateful for all your listeners that this is a podcast right now, not a podcast, so we can spare them. We don't want to injure people or shock them too early in the show. Let's leave that to the middle or the end when we got them engaged.
Absolutely. Well, as a friend of the show and as a fellow psychologist, I know that most people call you Fader. Would that be right, rather than Jonathan?
It's absolutely. Well, it's funny. I mean, I was actually on a panel where we were talking about coaching the other day, and one of the guys' his name is David Kapowitz, but everybody called him Cappy. And we were talking about how, like the first step actually to joining with any group is having an approachable name. And so people just started calling me Fader in sports. And remarkably, this is a weird fact, my wife calls me Fader, and my mom called my dad Fader. So actually, sometimes at home, it's even Fader Jr., if you can believe that.
Fader Jr. I was going to say that would be very confusing. Everybody's Fader there, but there's Fader and Fader Jr. I like it. Fader Senior.
And exactly, in sports, sometimes my nickname has become Faderade.
I think I've seen that. I think I've seen that on Twitter. Yeah, that's funny. Well, mine's quite plain and boring. My actual name is Daniel, and I became Dan. So nothing too exciting there.
Hey man, well, I know you're exciting in many other ways. So you can have whatever you want. As long as you keep it exciting in person. Any name works.
Sometimes, mate, sometimes. Well, look, Fader, I'd love, I know you've got a rich background in both psychology and sport and putting those together. So I know the Sports Psych Show audience would love to know more about you. Why don't you introduce yourself, what you've been doing, how you've got to where you are now?
Well, first, I think the thing that comes to mind first more than anything else is total gratitude. I always say that it takes both, skill and luck to be successful in life. And for me, I just feel extremely lucky to have had the opportunities that I've had, especially that I've found communities that have welcomed new ideas that I brought. And so, that really started for me in baseball. What got me into baseball in the United States was the fact that I speak Spanish fluently. And speaking Spanish fluently was really just an absolute game changer. So it allowed me to connect to a whole group of athletes that really didn't have as much of a voice. And, I was working in the minor leagues of baseball here in the States. We have about 200 guys in each Major League Baseball team who are trying to get to the big leagues, to Major League Baseball. And so started there, and just like a player or a coach, I worked my way up to working with the big league team and did that with the New York Mets. And then I went on to work in American football with the New York Giants for a couple of years. And my biggest passion, I'd say, over the past 3 or 4 years has been to take what we know in sport and performance psychology, and then what we know about motivational interviewing, which I know that you've talked about a lot and have a relationship with Steve Rollnick, the founder, taking those skills and adapting them to other settings, such as first responders and working with the New York City Fire Department here, the FDNY, and taking the transferable skills from what we know about sport psychology and applying them to other areas, and even areas off the court, even things like relationships and business, and also just family life, because I think there's so many crossovers.
Well, I'm super excited to get you on the show because, I mean, you've mentioned a few names there, one of which is Stephen Rollnick, who I had the honour and pleasure of speaking with last week, and we discussed motivational interviewing at length, and we really got down to the nitty-gritty of motivational interviewing. And I know that you've collaborated with him on a book, and that's what we spoke about last week. And that book is Coaching Athletes to Be Their Best, Motivational Interviewing in Sports. And yourself and Stephen, and I should mention Jeff Brecken and Teresa Moyers, collaborated to write this book, and I've read it, it's a fantastic book. And what I wanted to do in this episode is really get your experiences working with motivational interviewing in a sporting context, because I know you've used it to great effect within baseball, within American football, as you were saying there with the New York Giants. I mean, just fantastic. So I'd love to talk about that, but just, from your perspective, before we get down to the nitty gritty, hey, look, you've collaborated on this book, exciting times. Tell me about how that came about.
Well, it came about because first of all, motivational interviewing, this, technique, the strategy, I think in my view, and I know in Steve's view, that it's more of a way of being, has been part of my life since I was 19 years old. At 19, I was interested in psychology, didn't know what area of psychology I wanted to work in, but I was always interested in what I call the psychology of improvement, meaning how do people who have talent get better? So how do people that are already doing well get even better? And, I actually volunteered for this hospital position working in an addictions clinic because to me it was really interesting. That's a really concrete way to measure how people can get better in their lives. And there was a guy there, Jeff Foote, who was teaching about motivational interviewing. This is, not to date myself here, but we're talking about, the 90s. And, at that point, motivational interviewing had been around for about, 20 years. And I started to, that was the first language I learned, in the language of coaching, in the language of sports psychology, in the language of psychology. It was the first way I learned the lens that I learned to look at how people get helped. And so it really was transformative for me, specifically the idea, in essence, that, when someone is struggling, to push them or advise them or cajole them actually pushes them back more into struggling. And that, this approach is about trying to bring out people's real internal reasons to change their change rather than opposing them without. And also, what was fascinating to me was the idea that you could kind of operationalize, meaning you could teach people how to listen better, how to communicate better, and how to develop trust, which are, of course, central themes to what makes a great coach.
Well, I took a little snippet from the beginning of the book, just to set the scene here. I'm just going to read from it because it certainly got me excited, and knowing what I know about motivational interviewing, I believe what's being said here. It's a very strong statement, but I really believe it. What you and Stephen and Teresa and Jeff have written, you've written, imagine a scenario where whatever the pressure you're under, you and the athletes around you are in a great place, facing competition like champions, smart and effective. The setbacks might come rolling in, and yet there you are talking through the struggles and really supporting each other. You have many a tough conversation in and around this squad, and yet you never sink into a destructive blame game. Problems get solved, relationships remain solid, and you laugh and move on together. Over time, results improve. Now, I've seen the power of motivational interviewing, and as I say, I mean,
I don't know what it means, but I get chills hearing that. I mean, funny because it's a book that I wrote, but I literally feel like you're reading a war cry, or about, like, I feel like we're doing the haka here. Like, it's just, to me, what you just read is such a great selection of the book, because it's this imagined future that we all have as sports psychologists, as coaches, as parents, as athletes. This idea that we're working on something together. We're not at odds when there's conflict. As a team, or as even just a dyad, two people talking, I'm a coach, you're an athlete. We are connected and have a good relationship even in the face of a challenge. And to me, that's why I'm so passionate about motivational interviewing in the area of sport and in general, is for me, it provides a method for doing that. Everybody wants to communicate better. Everybody wants to develop trust. Everybody wants that scene that you so vividly read, but we're at a loss sometimes for exactly how to do it. And in sports psychology, one of the ways I talk to people is I talk about goals as just being what, how, and why goals. And most people in sports really only have what goals. What do I want to do? I want to improve my footwork. This is what I want to do. What do I want to do? I want to, block in this particular way. What do I want to do? I want to lose 10 pounds or change my weight class. These kind of things. What do I want to do? Win. But what we often don't do is really look at the parts of the goal that really count, which for me are the why and the how. And there's lots of research about the why, lots of people talking about that, and we know that's important. But the other part of it is really the how. For me, motivational interviewing provides a how. It provides a concrete, direct explanation for how you can connect better with athletes and how you get to that imagined, victorious future of connection that you just read about.
It's funny, we have more in common than we think. I wrote an article the other day on LinkedIn about what, how, and why. So we're both obsessed about the same thing. And I think you're absolutely spot on. I'm always talking to coaches about having a framework, if you like, and you've called it a method or a methodology, and motivational interviewing can fill that void. The how, as you said, there's so many people talking about the why. What is your why at the moment? Some quite iconic authors at the moment, but the how, is so important. And if I was to go back to that paragraph, there's a part in the middle that sums up motivational interviewing for me, sums up the how, and this is where I'd like to start. You say, talking through the struggles and really supporting each other. I'm going to say that again. Talking through the struggles and really supporting each other. Because sport, and look, you've worked in baseball and American football at the adult elite level. The level where I think a lot of people perceive that everything is very pressurized and it's all on the individual and the team to excel. And in many respects, I think it's what's... The common perception is the individual's got to go out there and do it. They've just got to go and do it, and they've got to have the capacity to do it. And I love that idea of talking through the struggles and really supporting each other. That encapsulates coaching to me.
I completely agree with you. I completely agree that there's this sense of the individual. There's this sense of, and I think for coaches too, there's a sense of, I'm going to go out there, and as an individual, I'm going to change what this person is doing or thinking or feeling. And I think there's less of a model or an idea that actually that change can only occur in a relationship. It can only occur, when two people are working together. As Bill Miller, the other founder of Motivational Interviewing, once said, "Nobody resists alone. Nobody resists alone." Meaning, it takes two to really be able to make a profound change. And often, as you know, in a football club, it takes a whole team to be on the same page.
Where does this journey start for coaches? If I'm a coach, where does this start? I mean, I know the book, I think, starts by talking about the power of empathy. If I'm a coach and I'm listening into this, whether you borrow from the book, whether you borrow from your own playbook, if you like, your own experiential knowledge, where does this start, Jonathan? Tell us about MI within sport.
Well, I think where I would start would be to say, if you're listening to this, it means you're a person already that values self-improvement. Because anyone who's going to take the time to listen to a podcast, it means that you've actually thought about, you have a level of self-awareness. And so I think, you've already started. Because if you're thinking about, if you're a coach at whatever level, and you're open to improvement, that means that you are on the right path. I mean, as John Wooden said, I love, one of the quotes I always think about is, it's what you've learned after you know it all that counts. It's what you learned after you know it all that counts. And so I think coaches that have what we sometimes refer to as a beginner's mind, that even though you're an expert, that you're able to really look at things anew. I think that's actually a good place to start, is to commend yourself for being here and listening to this discussion with someone like Dan, who has a tremendous amount of knowledge and is also looking for others to enhance the conversation. That's one. Second is to say, to further that own self-evaluation. So I think a lot about this idea of EQ, or emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence for me is really all about, it's about 5 factors, but the ones I think about as far as coaching are, number 1, self-awareness, and number 2, self-regulation. And so I think one place to start is to say, what am I doing every day to evaluate myself and to evaluate my conversations with players? It could be as simple as to take a second at the end of the day and just think about the conversations you had, and to think about what was your level of connection, and maybe ask yourself a couple questions, something like to ask yourself, how much do I know about what that player was thinking or feeling as I was talking to them? How much do I know? I know what I want them to do. I know what I want to fix or instruct. But how much do I actually understand about their perspective? And actually, how much do I know about them as a person? Because once you start asking yourself those questions, you begin to realize a lot of times, and by the way, I say you, I mean me as well. I mean, I've been doing motivational interviewing work for 20 years, and many times after I'm talking to a elite athlete, I finish the conversation and I realize, you know what? I was doing too much talking there. I don't really understand at a very, very deep level why that person wants to play football, baseball, basketball, whatever it might be, golf, why they want to do it. And I don't fundamentally understand what their deep opinions and beliefs are regarding the tactics that I'm suggesting or that the coach is suggesting. And so I think if coaches can take some time to ask themselves about where they actually are at and be really brutally honest with themselves, I think that can lead to a different level of understanding and openness to moving into actually the techniques that motivational interviewing suggests.
Okay. And motivational interviewing consists of, my understanding is it consists of a series of linguistic skills that can help people make change. Would that be correct?
Yes. I mean, I think of it this way. Most of the time, people kind of know generally what they should do. Now, in applied sports, it's a little bit more complicated because sometimes a coach has to actually instruct on a new technique. But oftentimes, coaches want athletes to do things that the athletes in themselves kind of know what to do. It's just that they feel 2 ways about it. We call that ambivalence. Ambivalence is when you feel 2 ways about something. So, for example, a coach might be suggesting that an athlete blocks in a certain way, runs in a certain way, is more aggressive or less aggressive. But the athlete is confused about it. And so what motivational interviewing is about having a conversation that can help to alleviate that confusion and can help the athlete to buy in and find his own or her own way towards the suggestion that the coach is making. And you're right. I think one way to describe the techniques of motivational interviewing they are a group of linguistic skills. In specific, it's about asking more open questions than closed. It's about making what we call affirmations. It's about listening reflectively and making summary statements. And we can get into real nitty-gritty detail because I know when I talk to coaches about this, they really want that how, and I'm happy to give it in the most clear terms. But what I'll say about this is, oftentimes when you learn about motivational interviewing, I think of it as kind of chess, or if you've ever played poker. The rules or the ideas are really simple, but in practice there's a million variations, and much of it is finding that mindset that we talked about like a few minutes ago, and having that. We talk about this in the book and a whole chapter on MI mindset, about finding that patience in that listening style within yourself, even in the midst of what could be chaos or pressure.
Before we get on to the specific skills that you use, that people can use, the motivational interviewing skills, what I hear you say is that this is a method that contains the philosophy I insist you resist, essentially, that if I tell you what to do, your ambivalence can come to the fore and prevent change, behavior change, skill acquisition, mental skills development, if you like. It might stop me from improving. And that the optimal way to help improvement come about, help change come about, is actually helping the player uncover their own brand of improvement.
1,000%. 1,000%. I mean, I think it's an outstanding description of what we're talking about in motivational interviewing, especially that idea of resisting. You know, the idea of I insist, you resist is central to what we try to avoid in motivational interviewing. We even have a name for it. You know, we say that all coaches, all of us, all sports psychologists, all people have what we call a writing reflex. Writing, R-I-G-H-T-I-N-G, meaning to right what's wrong. And this reflex that we all have is because we're human. And, you know, as humans, we notice what's wrong. It's built into our DNA. It's built into our evolution. It's why there's a startle response, right? It's why if a car backfires, you jump. We're all looking for what's wrong. And so when you're a coach, it's very easy to see what's wrong. And we see our job is to correct it. And certainly that is part of our job as coaches and sports psychologists. Absolutely. But it's only one part of our job. And we feel that what happens is we overvalue that. The coach will really overvalue that. And so the way that Steve and I talk about it, and the way that Steve, Jeff, and Teresa and I wrote in the book, is about three styles that coaches have. One is fixing. One is guiding, and the other is following. And typically what happens, Dan, is that most coaches kind of spend too much time, and their reflex is to go back to fixing, to instructing and telling people what to do. And certainly that's a big part of coaching. But the two undervalued speeds or ways of being with athletes are following, which means learning how to build up your skills at really listening in an empathetic way. We know is so foundational to building connection and buy-in. And then secondly, guiding, helping, as you said, the athlete to basically using questions, open questions to evoke, understand, and bring out their reasons for change.
Brilliant. So what I hear you say there is, I mean, you've got this continuum, if you like, and you've got fixing on one side, you've got following on the other side, you've got guiding in the middle, and it almost feels like you want to stand astride over the guiding with a foot slightly or quite close to the fixing and a foot slightly close to the following, and be adaptable as a coach. It strikes me what you're saying is that, hey, everyone, we're so socialized into this paradigm of coach as fixer, and what you're saying is, hey, look, there is an element of truth there. We can put a foot there occasionally, especially maybe when it comes to the technical side of things, but we really need to have a foot in the following camp, and we certainly need to be standing over the guiding sign here.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a beautiful metaphor. And I think most coaches, well, maybe where we should be anchored in guiding, are really anchored in fixing, which I get. There's tremendous pressure to fix. I mean, one of the questions I always suggest to coaches too, and I ask myself that too, is, you know, am I doing this for myself or for the athlete? When I'm saying something, am I saying something for myself or for the athlete? Meaning, will what I'm saying right now be helpful to the athlete? Even if it's absolutely correct, will it push them more or towards or away from the message? Oftentimes we just say things because we know it's right, but that doesn't mean that it's the right time, or that the athlete perceives it to be right, or it'll be helpful to them. So I always think about that when I'm about to share an idea with an athlete. It makes me think of, I was once in a Major League Baseball clubhouse, and there was a player that was struggling. I was talking to him, and he was a rookie, and I had a really good relationship with him. But I remember explaining something to him, and I felt tremendous pressure to help him. He was really struggling. He was in a slump, and I was really talking. I was giving him all kinds of techniques, ones that you and I work on as sports psychologists, improving his routine. We were talking about mindfulness. We were talking about imagery and self-messaging, things that we know are really helpful for athletes. And I was going through those in detail. And there was a game coming up, and I had not a lot of time, and I was just giving him all this information. Essentially, I was fixing. And he, was really respectful and said, thank you for your help. And I walked away. And I have to say, there was a little bit something in my head like, geez, I left something off of there. And as I was walking out, a veteran who I know really, really well and have a really close relationship came up to me and said, Fader. And here I don't know if he knew he was, but he was quoting Theodore Roosevelt. He looked at me and he said, Fader, man, people have to know that you care before they care what you know. People have to know that you care before they care what you know.
Love it. And
so fundamentally in that situation, he was really giving me a correction and saying what you were saying, basically. Look, in this moment, you were gravitating towards fixing when probably not only did you need to go more into guiding, but you needed to do more following, which would mean I need to just listen more. Even though there was pressure to win, pressure to fix, that what would have been most effective in that moment would really be to be asking questions and listening to him. And to that effect, doing that would actually lead to more opportunity for us to really get into the nitty-gritty of what would actually be helpful for him in terms of changing his behavior.
If you could climb into a magic time machine and go back to that moment, what would you have done different then?
First of all, I would have actually looked at myself. In the book, we have a chapter on, as I said, my mindset. And one of the things that I really strongly believe is many errors are made in sports and life when people don't have a calm mind. And so what I would do actually in that moment is I would take just a second to quiet my mind. I would remind myself of a sports psychology technique that I talk about to athletes, which is the abbreviation APE, A-P-E, which is the things that I control. Things that I control in that situation and the things that every athlete controls are not the outcome, but they're APE, which A stands for attitude, P, preparation, and E, effort. So if I could go back in time, I'd remind myself of the same acronym that I share with athletes and say, look, all I control here is just my attitude and my effort and my preparation. I don't really control what happens. In other words, I can't help this person directly to change their behavior. I can only provide the best conditions that'll be more likely that he will. And I think if I could do that for myself, and if coaches can do that, they're more likely to come out of conversation with a calm mind. The other thing I would do is I would have actually just taken a deep breath or two. Because I think actually bringing my excitement down, someone said to me recently, Dina Castor, who's a famous marathoner, said, anxiety or nervousness is excitement in disguise. Nervousness is excitement in disguise. And so I think there was a lot of my excitement there. And if I took a deep breath, I would have calmed down. And that would have given me access to a different style. And what I would have done there was I would have asked him more questions, open questions. I would have said things to him like, how do you see it? What do you think is the next step? Everybody's giving you advice right now. I'm curious, what do you think is the right next step? What do you think is the thing that's most getting in your way? What's at stake for you if you don't change here or adapt? So by eliciting those questions, I might gotten a deeper level. And then whatever he said, I would have spent time reflecting, which means saying back to him in the way that you're doing in this conversation. Oh, okay, so for you were feeling like actually overwhelmed by all the different viewpoints. Or for you disagree with everything, including what I'm saying. So those two skills are ones that I rely on 90% of the conversations I have. And I think in that moment, if I could go back in time, say, 6 or 7 years and do that. And if you develop the technology to allow me to do that, I want to know right away because I would love to go back to that moment. I would rely on that, on those skills more and have more of a following and guiding viewpoint and way of being.
Trust me, the first person I'm speaking to, if I actually create that piece of technology, is somebody who works in patenting. First of all, then I might let you know. Hey, listen,
I want to be second on that list. I'm definitely trying to cross the pond instantly.
We can reach a deal of some sort. Yeah. Now, what I love about fixing, guiding, following is, to me, and please correct me if I've got the wrong impression here, but within the guiding, which is in the middle, and the following, which let's call it on the right of the continuum, we've kind of got all the motivational interviewing skills, or a lot of them, and the main ones, if you like, neatly tucked into that continuum. As you mentioned earlier, the following offers listening or empathic listening, but certainly empathy and listening, and then the guiding is the open questioning, as you said there. Can we start with the following? Because I just think these are just vital skills that for coaches that are rarely spoken about. You know, the X's and the O's are spoken about before this, but behaviour change ultimately is more tuned to empathy and listening and empathic listening. So can you talk to us a bit about empathy and listening to be able to improve your ability to follow somebody?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that is most challenging about this approach, but so rewarding, is to learn how to be more of an empathetic listener. And what that means, Dan, as you know, because you are one, is to really have a conversation with someone where you're really putting yourself in their shoes. So an MI metaphor for this is sometimes we talk about coming alongside the person you're talking to. So if you can imagine, when you talk face to face with someone, you're really more of an adversarial approach. So we have this metaphor of coming alongside, which means it's kind of imagining that, and you're not doing this physically, but in your words and your actions, you're kind of throwing your arm around the guy or the woman that you're talking to. And the way you do that is really by starting off with, when you're talking to someone, imagining in your head, we call this perspective taking, imagining what are they thinking, what are they feeling. And so by doing that, you're beginning the process of really empathizing. Rather than thinking about what you want or what you want to achieve in the conversation, you're thinking about what they're thinking and feeling. And another way to think about this is that you could think of like two styles of listening. One style of listening is listening to reply. The other style of listening is listening to understand. And in developing the ability to listen empathically, you're really developing your ability to listen to understand. So rather than thinking, okay, when they finish talking, I'm going to say this, or interrupting them, is just actually thinking, what do these words mean? And what do I imagine is behind these words? What is the underlying thoughts and feelings that this human who's talking to me is feeling? And you follow that up by saying, okay, I'm going to now test my hypothesis. I think that this person is feeling fed up with everything. I think that this person feels confused. I think that this person is really searching for an answer. And you follow up by making a statement, not asking a question, but following up by making a statement to the person. And here's where it gets really important. Typically, what we do is we ask questions if we don't understand or we're not sure. In motivational interviewing, when we have a sense of what the person might be feeling, we actually make a reflect statement. And what that sounds like is if we think that someone is feeling like they just want to quit, we might say to them, well, actually, it seems like at this point you kind of just feel like giving up. And we're really careful about our intonation. In a question, your intonation goes up. It says, oh, so you want to quit? In a statement, it goes down. And we find that when you make these statements about what you're hearing from the other person, it very, very much signals to the other person that you're on the same page. And it builds kind of connection that allows people to let their guard down, to communicate more honestly, to develop trust, and then also to be willing to be guided, which means someone else will then ask more open questions to see if you can get underneath about the reasons why the person shouldn't quit and why soccer or the other thing that is important to them, or why whatever change that the person is ambivalent about, from changing their footwork to changing their weight to whatever it is that you might be talking about them, to getting to practice earlier, to being more aggressive, to being a better leader or a captain, that they're more willing to answer questions about that and have a deeper dialogue about that once they feel that the person really gets them.
So listening to understand and then reflecting back what you've understood. Exactly right.
So really just changing the set. And this is something that coaches can do right after listening to this podcast. This is something that a sports parent can do. This is something that a sports psych can do. We all can do this. Really, it's just an intention set, right? So, if you think about it in terms of, okay, today I'm going to go out, and while I'm listening to a player, I'm just going to wonder, what's going on for them as they're talking to me? One way to think about it is, imagine that they have subtitles under their face that are going off, but instead of in different language, they're actually in English or whatever language they're speaking, and the subtitles are saying what's really on their mind. You're trying to figure that out, and you don't have to go very deep psychologically. It could just be what they're saying, but to show people that you get what they're saying is a profound key to unlock a deeper level of trust and allow them to really come to the table with what needs to happen in order for them to resolve their ambivalence to change.
So an example of a reflective statement right now would be me saying to you, it sounds to me, Fader, like you're really passionate about motivational interviewing.
100%. When you say that, something in my brain goes off. I say to myself, even though I like Dan and I know Dan, he gets me at a profound level. And now, even if you were to say to me, hey, can I give you a suggestion? Which is another motivational interviewing technique. It's called asking permission. Hey, can I give you a suggestion? Hey, Fader, maybe if you said it in this way, I'm open to it. But if you hadn't said that, I might look at you as someone who didn't really get it. And so the fact is, when you say that, we're connecting now on a deeper level. And now I'm more open to you as someone who's a peer, who I respect, but not only do I respect, who gets me. And then if you have a suggestion later on, I'm going to be more open to that suggestion.
I know that affirmation is a big part of this process. Is the reflective statement an affirmation, or is that something different?
Yeah, so a reflective statement, so the way we describe the actual skills of MI, some people talk about it as the ORs. O for open questions or open-ended question, basically asking questions that are evocative, that begin with words like how, what, and why, and trying not to ask questions that are is or do type questions that are going to result in a yes or a no from the athlete. Affirmations, as you brought up, is the A. R is reflective statements, and S is summary. So affirmation is a technique that, and a way of being with people that is so, I mean, if you think I'm passionate about MI in general, I'm probably most passionate about affirmations, because I generally believe that despite our negative bias as humans, remember, in my mind, we are destined to be negative. We're destined to notice what's wrong. It's part of our evolution, right?
That's something a hypothesis I absolutely 100% agree with. Sorry, carry on.
No, I know you do, and I know that you're someone who gets it because you see, I think our profession exists because of this.
Yes.
So, and the way I explain it is, essentially when we were out in the plains trying to survive as early humans, we could go for 3 weeks, and we still can't, without food. We could go for 3 days without water. It's the rule of threes. 3 minutes without air. But we can go 0 time if we fail to notice a predator. So our whole central nervous system is rigged to notice predators. And so what that means is, day to day, as a coach, you're going to notice what's wrong immediately and want to fix it. And it's very rooted there. And so your ability to shift focus and put on what Steve Rollnick calls strength-based lenses is so essential. And for players to recognize that you're someone who sees them as people of value, not just athletes, but people of value, is what's so transformational for you to be able to then later on guide and fix. So one of the stories I sometimes tell is the story of B.F. Skinner, who, as many people know, is really the father of behaviorism. He's the person who developed this idea of understanding how behavior basically works, and developed this idea of operant conditioning, meaning when people are reinforced for things, they're likely to do those things more. And there's a story about him teaching at Harvard, right? And so his class decides to play a prank on him. And they decide, Dan, during the class, they decide, okay, listen, when he moves to the left side of the room, we're going to reinforce him. And so what's reinforcing for a presenter? Well, as you and I know, giving a lot of presentations, that someone who's looking at you and nodding and smiling is super reinforcing. Not so much when they fall asleep and drool onto their iPhone, but if they're there and they're nodding and they're looking at you, you're like, okay, I'm doing all right. So every time he moved to the left side of the room, they just nodded, right? And the guy, without knowing what everyone was doing, the guy who named and discovered this technique, lectured at Harvard from the entire left side of the room. He just tucked himself in the left side corner. And so, the take home here for everybody who's listening is basically we know that positive reinforcement is so profoundly important in everything from parenting to law enforcement, to be able to reinforce when people are doing what's right. And if you can, if it's not a game changer, if it's not if it's not something that needs to be immediately addressed, to be able to say, I'm going to ignore what's wrong and focus on what's right, if possible. I understand in sports there's some areas that you just have to fix. But anyway, affirmation, all that to say, that affirmation is built on the power of positive reinforcement. The idea that you're going to get so much more in helping people change from noticing what's right and pointing it out in a very specific way. And even in the past year, I mean, when we're collaborating on this book over the past 2 or 3 years, Steve Rollnick has helped me to even, I think, have a deeper level understanding of what affirmation really is and how it can be helpful for coaches.
Can you be specific there? In what way has he helped you understand that deeper? What example can you give us?
So I could say to you, Dan, this is a great show, right? You do a really great job here. And, I'm not sure what I can say or not say here, and I'll try to avoid cursing, but, basically what I say is everybody has a special place in their brain that lights off when people are giving them praise. It's called the BS meter,
Yep.
Right? And so if you give praise to someone that isn't pointing out something genuine and authentic, isn't pointing out something inherent, meaning really deep in them that's unchangeable, and without specifics, people's brains won't take it up and it won't be helpful. And there's tons of praise in sport. Good job. Great job out there today. All that stuff. Right on you, mate. Like that stuff. That's just in my mind, very neutral and slightly positive. But what's dramatically positive is when you make an affirmation or you give an affirmation. And what that looks like, if I were to give you one, I would say to myself, Dan, you really, wow, you are practicing what you preach. And when you're interviewing me, you're really doing it in a way that actually incorporates motivational interviewing, in the sense that you're asking open-ended questions and you're reflecting back to me. And to me, that's what makes a podcast great. Because if someone's just asking questions one after another, like stacked questions that's really, people don't really get engaged. But what makes it engaging is the way in which you're leading this. That makes it really evocative and allows me to become passionate.
I want to get down to the nitty-gritty of this because I think it's really, really important. And I want to probe on distinguishing between praise and affirmation, as you were doing there. You were helping us do there. So I'm trying to think of a working example here. A striker in football, in soccer, has scored a couple of goals, and the coach says, you had a great game out there. That was awesome. So that's praise. That's praise. As opposed to, let's say, the coach says to the player, you made some. You can help me out here. You made some great runs that led to your goals. Those are the hallmark of who you are as a player. Is that an affirmation or is that a praise?
It's really, well, first of all, I'm grateful for this example of striker, because I think that allows us to really, I'm very big, as you know, on being very practical, as you are. And that's one of the things I value about your work in soccer. And so I think what the other thing I'll say about this podcast is I love the level that we're getting into here, because I think it's going to be really valuable for lots of coaches and sports psychs and even parents who listen to this. So what you want to say to the striker is you want to ask yourself, again, what do I observe here? And what are the qualities that this person's demonstrating as they're scoring that goal? So let me ask you, if you're thinking about think of a particular striker you've worked with who had a couple of excellent goals. What would you say the inherent qualities of that player were that led him to score those goals?
Awareness and movement.
Perfect. There you go. So that's what you're trying to affirm. So you might say something like, wow, your awareness in that one moment, it really points to who you are as a player, right? And so what you're doing there is you're building this internal self-efficacy or confidence, meaning this: it doesn't matter if he doesn't score the next game, because what you're not affirming is the scoring. You're affirming the thing that led to the scoring.
So as you're speaking there, as a sports psychologist, I'm thinking affirming the process. As you're speaking there, I'm thinking of Carol Dweck's work on narrative and meaning, essentially, which obviously was the forerunner to her growth and fixed mindset. The narrative and meaning is what narrative are you creating, and what's the meaning of that? People have meaning systems. So helping shape the narrative for the footballer around awareness and movement, rather than the narrative around, I scored, which might not happen the following week. You're helping them create a narrative around the things that they can control, that process. Would I be
100%?
Yeah.
100%. I think, and to point out to even drill down on what you said, I think there's a lot of overlap between the growth mindset idea and this idea of affirmation. And I think that affirmation is taking it. Well, I mean, when Bill and Steve developed this whole idea. Really, affirmation was based on this idea of self-efficacy, or connected to self-efficacy, which is the work of this guy, Al Bandura, which basically says, if you believe something about yourself, and or someone that you trust and has a good relationship with you believes it about you, you're more likely to be able to replicate that action or activity. And so, who is more important in that kind of situation than a coach? And so bringing our whole conversation together, part of the reason that you follow or you listen well is so that when you give an affirmation like that, a player sees you as credible because you're someone that they trust, and that they have love for, or that that they care about you and that you care about them. And so when you make an affirmation, yes, you are affirming, as you said, the process usually, and you're affirming something that's unchangeable about them, and then maybe related to the outcome, but isn't about the outcome necessarily.
Heading back to Oars, the first letter in Oars is obviously the O, which is for open questioning. Let's just go back to that. The art of asking the right question, and I suppose the clue is in the title, isn't it? Open questions rather than closed questions. Could you give us some examples of how to improve the capacity to ask open questions?
Yeah, let me say that, I just did an MI training for about, 40 folks the other day, and I do those quite often. And what I realize is during my training, so just think about this for a second. During my training, I notice that I'm asking some closed-ended questions. So this is just really natural. It's really natural. And one of the reasons we do that is because it simplifies and shortens conversations. There's a big demand to be efficient. And so asking, do you think, or have you tried this? Have you done the exercise? Have you practiced? Did you do it the way we talked about? These kind of things. It's easier to handle a yes or no question, but we're not getting at the heart of the matter. And so, simply put, really what coaches can do, and anyone who's talking to athletes can do, is really focus more on what questions would begin with what, how, and why, especially what and how. So, for example, rather than saying, did you do the exercises? Even just saying something like, how did it go with the exercises? After a player comes off a game, asking them, so what went well today? How did you do with what we tried? How did it go? These kind of questions are great to elicit from players. And then really asking players questions like, well, just curious, what makes the most sense about what's being told to you? What are the benefits to this approach? What are the things that you don't think will work? These kind of questions are questions that really help to resolve the ambivalence. But more than that, one of the under I think appreciated aspects of asking open questions is it communicates to the player or the athlete what your perspective is on coaching. If I'm a coach that stops for a second and asks my athlete for their viewpoint, I am telling them by doing that I'm collaborative. The more open-ended questions I ask an athlete, the more I'm showing respect for them at whatever level they're playing.
Let's let me get a little bit challenging now, if I may.
Please.
You have. I'm not going to get that challenging now, but I'm sitting here. I'm listening. Hopefully, I'm empathically listening. I'm reflecting on the fact that you've worked heavily in baseball, and games are coming thick and fast. Like, you'd know far better than me. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's 170, 180 games per season or whatever.
162.
Right. 162 games. Surely coaches, you must have had coaches say to you, Fader, come on, man. We've got a game tomorrow, the next day. These players have to be ready. We just have to tell them. We just have to tell them what to do. Have you come across that? How have you dealt with that? What would you say to coaches? Because I'm heavily involved in the world of soccer, where we might not have 162 games, thank God, but we certainly have a game on Saturday, and then the Tuesday, and then Saturday. And coaches will often say, there's just no time for this. I've got to tell the players. They need to know. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, I think, if I'm reading you right, what you're saying, what's on your mind is like, what if, how do I deal with these coaches or with people that are saying, that are really, really focused on transactional relationships? They're focused on making things happen, and the people that actually don't value the importance of relationships.
Yeah, well, I'm probably saying, I think as a sports psychologist, I would recognise what you're saying, and I think it's related to that. I'm saying you must have coaches say, we've got to get a result tomorrow. There's no time for me to ask these questions. I've just got to get in and get out.
Yeah. So I'll answer that in the brief, and then I'll give you a context or a bit of a story, if I may.
Brilliant.
In brief, you want to go towards the resistance, not away from it. So what I would do with that coach, and what I've done many times, is to say, yeah, wow, you're under pressure to get things done. Right? And for you, right now, it's like, maybe I don't even have the time to deal with the larger athlete here, or what might be going on behind the scenes that might be really motivating them. And typically what they'll say to that is they'll give me more ambivalence. So in other words, if I fought that with someone, I always say, I don't like picking fights with athletes, and not coaches either, because they're former athletes. A lot of times I'm going to lose. So what I'm trying to roll with that resistance using motivational interviewing in that conversation with that coach.
Gotcha.
And so what I'm likely saying to that coach is to say, right, like, it's tough. There are 162 games, and you're going to agree. You're going to yes and then usually what happens is that the coach will present, not always, but more of a textured view, more of the pros and cons in the same way you did. So to give you a more specific example of that, I was working with a football club, and I was introducing mindfulness, which I know you know a lot about, but for people who might not, is using specific ways of being and exercising to help people to be able to accept the present moment more as it is, and to let go of the past and the future and really be where their feet are mentally and physically. And we think that actually helps athletes to play at their best, to approach flow or set the conditions where a flow state is more likely to occur. A host of other benefits too, like preventing injury, etc. But most people in the sports psych community agree mindfulness is a helpful technique for a lot of athletes. And so I was talking about this to the team, and one of the coaches was a veteran coach, kind of just, was way more challenging than you. You're a polite challenger. This person coming after me, and saying, well, we tried this before, it's a bunch of BS. And so my instinct there was to disagree and start citing science. A friend of mine, colleague of mine was a psychologist for the Navy SEAL elite soldiers in the United States, showed that mindfulness changes brains as well as behavior in a positive way. So there's so much evidence for it. But, that would be a war, and it would create more resistance and hostility. So really, in my mind, what I needed to do in that moment was follow, which is what I did. I started asking more questions and reflecting back what had been his negative experience. And in that conversation, he was able to also speak to some questions he had about it. And I was able to fix and give information, but we would have gotten there unless I was following and guiding, asking questions and showing him that I understood his perspective first.
So in terms of that line of questioning, did you ask him, for example, did you ask him the question, so what challenges have you had in the past with mindfulness?
Completely. What challenges have you had with mindfulness? What were the parts about it that you disliked the most?
Yeah.
Why do you think it doesn't work? What are the things, the obstacles to implementing it or to bringing it in a football program? What are the things that you found irritating? And then even drilling more detail there. So when he talked about, for example, the getting calm, then I can both ask more questions. What it mean to get calm? What is the kind of where is the place for calm in these preparations? And so by showing that I was asking the questions that you suggested and that I was saying, I was able to really get to a deeper level of what bothered him, and able to then offer ideas only once he was open to my ideas, and only once I understood which ideas would have fallen flat in the beginning.
So what I hear you say is, if you've got resistance to change, if you've got resistance, you work towards the resistance by asking questions to uncover the seeds of resistance.
Absolutely. That's exactly right.
Another thing I'm curious about, and I suppose, let's try and work this through. A final thing here is I don't know how much work you might have done within baseball, football, American football, any other sport, on, say, the technical side of things, and where you think MI, motivational interviewing, stands with this. Because obviously there's big debates at the moment within skill acquisition, sports psychology, sports science, coaching science, the value of being a fixer of technique, of telling players what to do technically. And it strikes me that motivational interviewing can be a great methodology to use to help players fix themselves or find solution themselves with technique. Do you think that's, so we're sort of stepping away from the softer side and onto the technical side, do you think MI can be used there, and what pushback might you have had there as well?
Well, I absolutely do, and I actually think that many coaches and many coaches I've worked with are already doing some level of MI, right? It's not, it's not that this way of being is completely unfamiliar to them. It's more like they're tuning up their technique. There's this kind of meta process where coaches are listening are thinking, oh, okay, I do that, but maybe I can do that more. So to give you an example, I think we're in skill acquisition. Let's take kicking in American football. So, here someone is kicking a field goal through two upright posts, and they're doing it in it's kind of like a penalty kick, right? Except, there's people trying to tackle you while you're doing it. And, what I find is that the best coaches, and kickers are always tweaking their form constantly, and thinking about, everything from wind to body position to weight to every level of, it's kind of like, it's like golfing with tackling, and except for, you're using your leg to golf. And, the best coaches I've seen are coaches that ask questions, that say to the player, okay, what was that like? What do you think happened there? Where was your weight? How did that feel? And then only then give advice. And the other thing I'll just say about this briefly is, even fixing can have an MI adaptation. The one thing that we suggest and that I work on a lot with coaches is when you're going to give advice, to actually ask permission.
Yeah.
And some coaches do this already, but to say, for example, especially if you have a player you're not sure how they're going to take it, or you have a player that's been somewhat sensitive or is a bit resistant to advice, when you are fixing. So let's say you have a player who's maybe open, when you're fixing, to use a strategy of asking permission, which really means, as you know, Dan, just saying to the player, hey, I have something that, an adjustment that's worked for a lot of strikers that I've worked with. And then just waiting for them to respond. Or saying, how would you feel if I shared that with you? But oftentimes you don't have to do that. You just wait for them to respond. Now, when they respond yes, which 99% will, that to the player feels a lot more like actually they asked for the advice in the first place. So it changes the relationship about how skill acquisition occurs. And to be able to do that, even for a player that is somewhat motivated, changes the way in which they feel that it changes the buy-in process. And that skill acquisition becomes much more volitional, much more about their initiative than being imposed onto them.
Interesting. Well, you certainly take my interest. I mean, I have a fascination for motivational interviewing, and it sits neatly alongside the frameworks and tools and techniques that I utilize within my work. And I know you would have tapped the interest of the audience. So where can people get your book, Coaching Athletes to Be Their Best, Motivational Interviewing in Sports? And how, more importantly, can people find you, get in contact with you? Do you use social media?
So yes, you can find me personally at jonathanfader.com is my name. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Dr. Fader, DrFader, or on Instagram at Jonathan_Fader. And the book, Coaching Athletes to Be Their Best, is now available. You can buy it straight off of Amazon. And, as we said, I mean, your questions were very high level, Dan, as I expected them to be. I actually liked it when you were, as you say, challenging, because it is challenging. It's really challenging to be a coach. And I appreciate the work that all the coaches I've worked with and the ones that have helped me to write this book in terms of, how much people of their lives they give to athletes. And my real hope is that this serves coaches, that this book really serves coaches and sports parents and sports psychologists and gives them just one more tool to stay connected and be effective with their relationships with athletes.
Well said, mate. Well, look, Fader, thank you so much for taking time to call in today and speak to the Sports Psych Show. It's been absolutely awesome, and look forward to having you back on in the future.
We'll get in your time machine, man, and we'll come back and do it one more time. We'll
Yes.
pick up all the places we wanted to say something different. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No worries. And if I've patented my time machine, we'll be doing it from Hawaii, I think, probably, or some Mauritius or something like that. And
Tahiti.
It won't be Skype, and I will fly you over, and we can be sipping cocktails and talking MI. So
I'm down. Just let me know.
Anyway, thank you so much. And everybody, that was Dr. Jonathan Fader. I really did enjoy that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me exactly what you think of the show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm really looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.